Welcome to the Veterans in Politics International Candidate Forum. I'm Natalie, Winslow, the moderator. We'd like to thank our sponsors, Ron Hugh for Clark County Treasurer, Michael Broadway Real Estate, Real Water, and Lakeside Business Suites. Can I have the panelists introduce themselves?
Robert Foust, US Army VIP member.
Chehade VIP member, Internet Sales and Consulting.
Lena Ocasio, Air Force veteran and real estate broker.
Troy Warren, VIP member.
Bletnitsky, Coast Guard veteran and technology consultant.
Thank you. Can I have the candidate introduce yourself and give us a 2-minute bio?
Yes, still good morning, Steve Wolfson. I am the Clark County District Attorney. Thank you for this opportunity to visit with all of you and to seek your endorsement. It's a very important endorsement. I was appointed to the position of Clark County District Attorney in 2012 when my predecessor resigned, and then in 2014 I was elected to a 4-year term. So I've been the District Attorney now for a little over 6 years. I've been in Las Vegas 38 years. I actually started my career in 1980 in the Clark County District Attorney's Office as a young deputy district attorney. I did that for about 5 years. I then was a federal prosecutor for 2 years. And then the wife said, go into the private sector and make some money. So I went into the private practice of law, which I did for 25 years. And then in 2012 became the district attorney. So that's a 2-minute introduction and bio.
Thank you. We're going to go into our first question.
You've stated a few things about what I'm going to talk about on the Second Amendment. It's taking a bashing right now, especially after what happened with 10-1. We have a candidate running for governor going just off the reservation about banning stuff. I'd like to know your position on the Second Amendment, and do you support banning guns, period?
Of course not. I support the Second Amendment. I'm a gun owner. I have 3 weapons in my house right now for self-protection. But I do believe that it's appropriate to have reasonable rules regarding the ownership and the possession of weapons. It's no secret that I supported the background check law, and I still do, because there are categories of people that should not be in possession of weapons, such as the mentally ill, persons that are convicted of domestic battery, ex-felons. And that's what that law is designed to do, is to attempt to keep handguns, primarily, out of the hands of dangerous people. But I'm a supporter of the Second Amendment. I've said that many, many times over the years, and I will continue to support the Second Amendment.
Lena Ocasio, Air Force veteran. There's been quite a bit of controversy in the papers regarding your aide, who had a gambling problem, and then she took $43,000 from campaign funds and then paid it back. She was fired, then rehired. What do you say to the voter here that has a problem and sees that as your aide receiving preferential treatment versus the average guy or gal who's in the courtroom and they're being charged with the same type of crime?
Well, I will tell you that since that article or series of articles came out a couple of months ago, which detailed an event that occurred 4 years ago, I would say that 19 out of 20 people that I've spoken to, and I take it with a grain of salt because sometimes people tell you what they think you want to hear, support my decision. I had to make a choice 4 years ago what to do with a very trusted employee, an employee that I've had now 14 years, and she's the best employee I've ever had in my 38 years of professional career. She did not get any different kind of treatment than a lot of people get. And I'll use the example of this. I have a bad check unit, which is designed to prosecute people who write bad checks. And we receive about 200 referrals a week in our bad check unit. And the first thing we do, and these are people that write checks for insufficient funds or forged checks, hundreds and thousands of dollars. The first thing we do is we send them a letter basically saying, if you pay the money back, no charges will be filed. And 70% of those people pay the money back without charges being filed. Other examples, I could go on and on and on, I don't want this interview to take 2 hours, where if the victim chooses not to prosecute, and if the victim says, I'd like to be paid restitution back, we honor that victim. Every case is viewed on a case-by-case basis. What are the circumstances of a particular case? If a person has a significant prior record, a record of thievery, and here we are the 3rd or 4th time, we're not going to give that person a dismissal. If a person steals with evil intent, with no addictions or anything, we're not going to give that person necessarily a dismissal. But this employee had a very serious gambling addiction. Her mother had just passed away, I believe, 6 months before this event. She was 100% remorseful, ashamed. She was so ashamed when I found out what happened. She entered a gambling treatment program within hours of me discovering this, and she completed that program. And I could give you examples after examples of people receiving the exact same treatment. So I respectfully disagree with a lot of the things the RJ says. They tell a one-sided story and they don't tell a full story.
That's shocking.
And Steve, thank you so much for being with us today. We appreciate that. George Chehade, your VIP member. Just a general question: what are you most passionate about with the office, and what changes you would like to see happen?
I think I'm most passionate about the people that I work with. I have 750 employees. I think it's the 3rd largest department in the county, 175 attorneys, the largest law firm in the state of Nevada. And can you imagine dealing with 175 lawyers? That's a lot of big egos. But they do great work. They really do. We are under-resourced, like a lot of government agencies. I'd like to have 50 more prosecutors, because I think we could put a larger dent in violent crime. So I'm very passionate about the people I work with, and I deal on a regular basis with victims of crimes. I personally meet with victims on a regular basis, so I'm very passionate about that. I want to see certain reforms, though, continue on. The best example I have is I brought the first conviction integrity unit to the state of Nevada. This is a unit that reviews persons who have been in prison who may be innocent, because I firmly believe there are people in prison that are innocent. And this is a unit that does independent investigations of the evidence. I brought this unit, the first one, to the state of Nevada about 16, 17 months ago, and I was very pleased that we actually exonerated a young African-American man that was convicted of committing a murder and spent over 20 years in prison. When we reinvestigated the case because another convicted murderer in California came forward and confessed to this one, we determined that he didn't commit the crime, and I caused his release from prison. So that's one reform I brought to the DA's office. Another thing we need to look at and keep working on is bail reform. We have a new tool that we use, the courts, the DAs, the public defenders. It's called the risk assessment tool. There are too many people in jail that shouldn't be in jail because they can't afford low bails. We need to determine, which we try and do, determine who are the dangerous people, who are the people that won't come back to court. Those people should stay in jail, but the other 80 or 90% should be released. So we use this new risk assessment tool to determine just that, a risk assessment. And I could go on and on again with other things, but those are 2 projects that I've been working on most recently. A third one, if I were to ask you, I love doing this, so I'm going to ask you guys a question. If I were to ask you how many pending murder cases you think we have in Clark County, so before trial, pending murder cases, what would your guess be?
I have no.
500?
200?
I usually get 100 or 200. We have 350 pending murder cases. 50 of those are more than 5 years old. 80 of those are more than 3 years old. That's a lot of people waiting to go to trial. That's a backlog of murder cases. So I chaired a subcommittee which eventually brought a new pilot program to Clark County We have 4 judges now that hear all of the murder cases, and we're dipping into that backlog of murder cases. That's good for the victims' families who are waiting for justice. It's good for the defendants. I don't think defendants should have to wait 5 and 7 years for resolution of their cases. So that's a pilot program I brought about a year and a half ago.
Robert Foust, US Army VIP member. Does your office participate in the paying of informants? And if you do you notify the defendant's attorney for the defense?
The answer is somewhat, but not too often. The federal...
Somewhat or not, could you be more specific?
Yeah, I'm about to do so. The federal government pays informants much more often than the state government. We don't pay informants very often at all. Do we help victims and informants with their cases sometimes? Yes. Sometimes people will want their case to be reduced in exchange for providing information. And yes, we are required by law to notify the defense, and we do that. Yes, we do.
Thank you.
We actually, go ahead.
That's right. So let me ask you, where are you at on the Veterans Court?
There are 2 veterans courts in the county system right now. One at the district court level, that's Judge Bell, one at the justice court level, which is Judge Letizia. When I took office 6 years ago, my predecessor had removed DAs from the specialty courts. He didn't want his lawyers in the specialty courts because he said, I need them elsewhere. I made a commitment to the county commissioners when I interviewed for this job in 2012 to put DAs back into specialty courts, which is what I did. Right now, Judge Bell is the district court veterans court judge, and Judge Letizia is the justice court veterans court judge, and my lawyers are in those veterans courts. These are good questions.
Lena Ocasio, Air Force veteran. As a victim of domestic violence, I've been negatively impacted by the fact that we do not have Marsy's Law yet here in Nevada. I understand you are a proponent of Marsy's Law. If it is not passed this year by the voters, what are you going to do to ensure that victims' rights, like myself, are in fact protected?
Well, right now, by Nevada law, we already provide about 50 to 75% of what Marsy's Law will require us to provide. We already provide victim notification, victims' ability to speak in court, etc. I'm fairly confident that Marsy's Law is going to pass. I'm hopeful and I'm confident. If it does pass, then now it's a constitutional amendment. It's by the Constitution, which will require certain rights to be afforded victims. If by chance it doesn't pass, then I will participate in the effort to bring it back so it does pass. You know, I have a unit in my office. It's our domestic violence unit. It's 5 lawyers that do nothing but domestic violence cases, and I just added 1 more because it's such a serious problem. There was an effort to dissolve domestic violence court. It was in the newspapers a few weeks ago because some justice court judges wanted to get rid of domestic violence court. I led the effort against that, and they backed off, so we are still going to have the domestic violence court, which is so important because it provides specialized, trained prosecutors, advocates, and I could go on and on and on. It's very important to have specialized domestic violence courts.
Where do you prioritize animal abuse and neglect cases? You know, both abuse as well as things like cockfighting rings that I've been involved in a couple of seizures recently, and some other cases like that, dog fighting, those types of things.
Well, purely by coincidence, my Chief Deputy District Attorney Amy Ferreira just 3 days ago received the annual Award of Merit, I'm not sure what it was called, by the Humane Society. And I was there to congratulate her over at the Government Center. It is a priority. I chose Chief Deputy DA Amy Ferreira about 2 years ago to head up that unit, and boy did I choose the right person because she has such passion and compassion for the people and the animals she deals with. She's great at it. I think she has 16 active cases set for trial. I'm very familiar with those cases. I meet with the advocates on a regular basis, and some of them are a little crazy. Maybe it's a little bit passionate, but they're an interesting group of folks. But I have one lawyer, because that's all I need right now, who targets animal abusers.
I'd like to get back to the domestic violence issue. When you have a restraining order against somebody and they violate that, or you know there's no doubt that it's going to be violated, how do you, I want to ask this question. Okay, for example, I had a friend of mine, she had a restraining order against her ex-husband. We knew he was going to do something. Now, fortunately for me, I got the call, I was able to intervene before it happened, we had him arrested. When they cross that line and they seem to be getting released, is there something that the DAs can do to actually prevent that? I mean, because a piece of paper doesn't stop anything. How do we handle that, and how does the DA, you as the DA, how can you, is there something that can come through the legislature? Is there some other kind of protection? Because, you know, people are dying.
Well, out in the community, the first line of defense are the police. So it's the police's responsibility to respond to somebody who's violating a protective order. If they do respond and they arrest the person, they send the case over to my office for prosecution, and we do file charges. Those are dangerous folks. A new law went into effect January 1st of this year, which requires the dispossession of firearms of certain categories of people, including people that have violated protection orders. So when those cases come to my office, we prosecute them. But we can't, I mean, if somebody wants to violate a TPO, and that's what you're saying,
Yeah.
Troy, I had to squint because I don't have my glasses on. Somebody's gonna do it. I mean, would I like to prevent all shootings? Of course, but there's going to be shootings.
Well, it's not even shootings. It's,
Well, no, it's harassment, it's all that.
yeah.
As far as the legislature, you see, I think it's more, well, not more, but it's certainly an educational component. I don't think we as a community do enough to educate people about what they can and can't do. You know, we have casinos that make a lot of money. It's the biggest industry in this community, and I don't think they do enough public service announcements. I think we need to educate our children and everybody about, for example, impaired driving. I told you about my domestic violence unit. I have a DUI unit, 5 lawyers that do nothing but impaired drivers. And people are still out there killing people on the roadway. I'm just amazed with Uber and Lyft. How are you, sir? I just realized who you were. You have a beard, right? It's just amazing to me with Uber and Lyft and call a friend and all that people are still killing people out on the roadway. And I think partly is because we don't have enough effort at public service announcements. Just on television, warning people, don't drink and drive. That's my personal opinion.
I'm good.
That will conclude our questions for today.
2 minutes.
Can I ask the candidate to give a 2-minute endorsement to the panel?
Yes, thank you, and thank you all. Some interesting, challenging questions. Your endorsement is important to me. I've worked with veterans since I became the district attorney. In fact, I brought a letter with me from then Assemblyman Elliot Anderson, who back in 2012, when I became the district attorney, thanked me for agreeing to work with him towards veterans' rights. As Mr. Sanson knows, last legislative session, I brought a work group together which consisted of Senators Spearman and Assemblyman Anderson, because the Veterans Court statute needed some amendments. And with this working group, Assemblyman Anderson and Nicole Canizero, another assembly person, or senator from my office actually, worked to amend the Veterans Court bill, which now specifically allows for a Veterans Court in justice courts and municipal courts, which the prior statute did not allow. We also expanded the statute so that there was no confusion on persons that were arrested for domestic battery and DUI and their ability to participate in the Veterans Court. So I've worked with veterans groups for years. I support veterans. I have my lawyers in the veterans courts, and I recognize that veterans are a special class of people that need some special recognition. So thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you to our candidate, thank you to our panelists, and thank you to our sponsors, Ron Q for Clark County Treasurer, Michael Broadway Real Estate, Real Water, and Lakeside Business League.